The Vikings, despite being famous for being the bloodthirsty warriors who looted, raped, and destroyed everything they found in their path, are actually much more than that. Even some historians consider them, along with the Greeks and Romans, the great fathers of modern Europe. Want to know why? Alright, then stay until the end of the video. The origins of the Vikings date back to the Germanic peoples, who were Indo-European peoples who settled in northern Europe. How do we know this? Well, because of the linguistic similarities between the Nordic languages and the other Germanic languages, such as German or Dutch. These peoples, who initially settled on the coasts of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, initially lived peacefully and had little contact with the major European states, such as the Greek city-states or the Western Roman Empire. The first documented appearance of the Vikings, and what many consider the beginning of the Viking Age, is in June 793, following the invasion of the Lindisfarne Monastery in northern England, where the Vikings looted and murdered several monks and took the survivors as slaves. This would be the start of a series of various attacks, where the most affected were the British Isles, that is, the current United Kingdom and Ireland, the island of Iona, Scotland in 795, and in the following decades, various in the Hebrides. That same year, there would also be the first attack on Ireland, on the island of Rathlin, and later on some other monasteries in Wales. Yes, they took the British as a point. How could they conduct numerous raids on existing kingdoms? Well, due to the unfriendly geography of Scandinavia, the Vikings developed a quite modern fleet for their time, with vessels known as Drakkar, of shallow draft, which allowed them to dock more easily at any time, and therefore they could enter by surprise before the victims could react. At the beginning of the 9th century, the Vikings began expeditions to the unstable Carolingian Empire, which, upon the death of Charlemagne in 1814, became easy prey as the civil wars among the Carolingians began. The Vikings managed to loot some cities that they entered through the Seine, Loire, and Garonne rivers. One of these offensives was led by the Viking Ragnar Lodbrok. Gradually, they established bases from where their expeditions would set out, such as in the Orkney and Hebrides Islands in Scotland, Guignard-Montier, and the Carolingian Empire. Some of them turned into important cities like Cork in 1846, and Dublin in 1841, which even became the capital of Ireland. With this, the Vikings showed that they were not content with being simple pirates, but that they had the makings of conquerors. And it was not for less, because according to their religious beliefs, the bravest would inherit the paradise of Valhalla. The main gods, as you should already know, were Odin, Thor, and Frey. However, unlike the rest of Europeans, there was greater religious freedom, as not all Scandinavians were obliged to follow the religion, and they did not worry about imposing it during their conquests. On the other hand, the role of women was not so repressed. In fact, they could choose who to marry. As for the social scale, the Vikings were divided into aristocrats who controlled the lands, owned the Drakkars, and decided on the expeditions. The free men, who were peasants and craftsmen who could participate in the conquests, but received less part of the loot. And finally, the slaves, who were mostly prisoners captured from the lootings. But their treatment was not as harsh as the slaves from the rest of Europe. Wow. Well, it seems that for their time, the Vikings were a quite advanced society. I wonder if that's why the Nordic countries are now the most prosperous and advanced. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel to stay updated with more content. But anyway, continuing with the looting, in the following years, the Vikings would plunder Muslim security and then attack Italy. Yes, the Viking terror was not only feared in Northern Europe, but throughout the entire continent. For this, the Vikings who invaded Northern and Western Europe came from what is now Denmark and Norway. The Swedes, on the other hand, ventured east, where they were known as Varangians. The Varangians took advantage of the Dnieper and Volga rivers to explore Eastern Europe. By the 860s, they would found Kiev, turning it into an important center in the middle of the trade routes between the Byzantine Empire and Northern Europe. This city would be the capital of Kievan Rus, which was founded by the Varangian Oleg of Novgorod in 882, and this state would be the basis of the future Russian state. Yes, a Viking founded the largest nation on earth, And birds, the Vikings were not just bloodthirsty pirates, and they have left a great mark on history. While the Vikings were fighting with everyone, they also had internal conflicts. So many towns and small kingdoms would need to start. The first was Norway, which after the Battle of Hasford, Harald the First of Norway would achieve a victory over the other kingdoms and would be crowned as the first king. In Denmark and Sweden, on the other hand, they continued to form certain kingdoms. And do you think the Vikings were content with continental Europe? Well, no. By 874, the Norwegian Vikings, led by Ingolfur Arnason, would arrive in Iceland, driving out the Irish monks who had settled there. Several Vikings would migrate to these islands, and in 930, it would be converted into a commonwealth. Due to Iceland's distance from mainland Europe, Icelanders did not receive foreign linguistic influences, so it is said that a modern Icelandic speaker could understand a Viking-speaking Old Norse. Returning to France, after the disintegration of the Carolingian Empire, the Vikings who settled in the north of the Western Sphere, known as the Normans, managed to establish the Duchy of Normandy in 911 after the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte, where the Viking chief, Rolf Granger, in order to receive all those lands, swore loyalty to the King of France, Charles III, in addition, of course, to converting to Christianity. See, the Vikings were adaptable in religious matters. The Normans would eventually integrate into France. So to speak, they were a fusion of Vikings and French. Over the following centuries, they would make certain conquests in England and Ireland and southern Italy, Tarragona and Spain, and note that they would even reach the Middle East. While they were not 100% Vikings. I tell you this to emphasize the legacy that the Vikings left. And it seems conquests were in your blood. After Iceland, the next stop to the west would be Greenland. The first to found a settlement was Eric the Red, around 985, who baptized it with this name, which means Greenland. In the place of El Anshum de Ox, even though these settlements did not last more than a couple of decades. The fact is that the Vikings arrived in America almost 500 years before Columbus. For this, Iceland and Greenland started as Christians. As I mentioned earlier, the Vikings had freedom of worship, so some were gradually adopting Christianity. The Christianization of the Vikings, which began in the 9th century, would be a slow progress through missions from France and England, and would not culminate until the 13th century after the foundation of the archdioceses of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. Returning to the British Isles, well, the Vikings had found a perfect business, looting and then asking for indemnities that were becoming increasingly profitable, in addition to having established colonies like York and Dublin, and having quelled resistance in episodes like the Battle of Malden. However, the pinnacle point of Viking influence in the British Isles would begin when Svend of Denmark ascended to the throne, becoming King of England for a short period after deposing Ethelred the Seven, after reaching London itself. In 1016, however, the Vikings would regain control of England, when Canute the Great, son of Svend I, simultaneously ruled Denmark, England, and Norway. This period was known as the North Sea Empire, and it would last until 1035, after which the Anglo-Saxons would regain control. And after a few years, Denmark would unify in 1058. In the British Isles, the Viking influence would end after the defeat at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, in which the Norwegian king Harald III Hardrad died in an attempt to claim the English crown. As a result, the Viking army was almost destroyed, and it marked the end of the Viking invasions in England. While it is said that the Viking era would end with the defeat of Harald III, the truth is that the Vikings never actually disappeared as such, but over time they mixed with the locals in the territories they conquered, perhaps thanks to that ease of integration they demonstrated. British, Irish, French, Spanish, Russians, and Ukrainians, all of them have Viking blood running through their veins. That's why I emphasize the Vikings, along with the Greeks and Romans, were the great founders of Europe. If you like this video, don't forget to support me with a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel to stay updated with more content. See you next time.